Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back. We're kicking off the last afternoon already of this year's St. Gallen Symposium. I hope you've enjoyed your lunch. Hope you didn't eat too much because there's many exciting sessions waiting for us this afternoon. So I hope you're all ready and excited to get a lot of inputs today. I actually now have a really quite small role, so I'm going to hand over to Tobias right away. And please do tell us what waits for us right now in this session, and maybe also why there's 3 of us up here.
Certainly. Now, my name is Tobias von Mehring, as you already said. I'm in my 6th semester of business administration, and throughout last year, I've been responsible for our marketing and communications as a part of the International Students Committee. The handsome man on my right here is Elia Lohe. He's in his 4th semester of business administration, and for his part in the team, he is responsible for our evening programs. So if you enjoyed yourself last night, he's the man to thank.
Yes. I just want to say I lost my voice. And that wasn't because of the party last night. No, really. Actually, I'm a bit sick. Perhaps because of sleep deprivation, perhaps because of other factors. That's why Tobias is here, helping me out today.
Precisely. I'm here because Elia can't talk.
Yes.
Thank you. Now, Elia told me about a conversation he had yesterday with Nyankoro Yea Seake. Hopefully I got that right. The conversation was about money. When Seake was asked about its importance, he said, money is only as good as the good that you do with it. With AI, it's basically the same. Technology is neither inherently good nor bad. It's neutral. It's a tool where its use reflects the ethics of its users. Consequentially, when I think of AI, it leaves me with mixed emotions. I mean, just consider the history of nuclear technology. In the beginning, it was praised for its potential, but soon, this very same technology was used to build weapons of mass destruction. Still, your reaction to AI likely says more about your perspective than it does about the technology itself. Are you an optimist or a pessimist? Pessimists may focus on privacy invasion, military usage, and mass surveillance, whereas optimists see its potential to improve personalized medicine, workflow efficiency, and so much more. Indeed, it's like the old question, is your glass half empty or is it half full? And by the way, if it's completely empty, Elia encourages you to refill it at one of his bars tonight.
Exactly.
Thank you. Now, lastly, I would like to add one final thought. At the heart of this discussion lies the question whether AI optimizes human performance or whether it replaces it completely. If AI can really outperform humans intellectually, then we must ask ourselves, what qualities do we as humans possess that AI will never be able to replicate? Is it perhaps our ability for emotional and conscious depth? Is it our ability to be genuinely and ingeniously creative? Or are humans essentially doing the same as AI, just mostly recycling existing knowledge into new formats? Now, I would like to invite the panel on stage, and with them our topic leader, Professor Oliver Gassmann. He is the Professor of Technology Management here at the University of St. Gallen. Let the discussion begin.
Thank you for joining us today.
So, hello, dear audience. Welcome to the AI revolution. So, I think AI is just everywhere. So, the social medias are full with prompting, suggestions, platforms, websites. It's really hard to catch up with it. There's a lot of data-based business models going on. There are a lot of initiatives in terms of efficiency. And let's just reflect shortly. It all started with the deep neural network with the AlexNet on the 30th September 2012. That was the first time a convolutional neural network for imaging recognition did actually a breakthrough. It was a deep network, but it just had actually 8 layers at that time. But that was the start. And it was the start actually of a 10-year period where you mainly actually learn to discriminate what is a dog, what is a cat, what is a stop sign, what is a go forward sign, and what is a tempo limit. And these things are the parts of the discriminative AI. Now in 30th of November 2022, just shortly ago, there was the ChatGPT. I remember when I had 10 days later a presentation in Singapore on new technologies and how do we manage it and how to manage business models around that. And I had to check that out. So I was not among the first million in the first week who applied on that because that was the fastest growth ever. But I was one of the kind of follower, and I saw that. And during my flight, actually, I thought, wow, this is amazing what you could do out of it. Just a short check here. Who is actually working in the audience? Maybe you could see who's working actually on a daily base on an AI-based tool like ChatGPT or Copilot. The rest, I'm sure you also do, but you just didn't realize that you do it. That is the big difference right now. That's actually, by the way, also the difference why the version 3.5, the AI community expected the 4.0 version. It was just the 3.5 version, and the 4.0 version happened in 4 months later, was launched 4 months later. And that was actually a big thing. We talk about scarcity here, and it's mainly the driver for scarcity of GPUs. You know that 92% of all chips are manufactured in the high-end version are actually manufactured at TSMC in Taiwan. It's a super concentration. We have a scarcity of money at the moment because 191 million has been invested in engineering, electricity, and mainly GPUs for training actually the large language model of Google. And NVIDIA is, with its 2 trillion market valuation, actually a direct follower of it. And we will discuss here with this panelist actually how do we exploit it, what are biases, what are challenges, how we manage that all. And I would like to introduce my panelists, very distinguished guests. First, Matthias Tauber on my left side. He's Managing Director of BCG, Europe, South America, EMEA, has a background in engineering and MBA at INSEAD, still all right. And he has a huge experience in transformation projects in all areas, M&As, digital transformation and all others. On second, Alexandra Wudel. She's founder and CEO of FemAI. This is a company which is aiming at the intersectional and inclusive feminism in AI. So what are kind of biases what we have and how could we prevent that? She did research and consulting, also ethical guidelines for institutions like the Federal Foreign Office, the UN, and the German Bundestag. So also distinguished, experienced person on AI. And last but not least, Jonas Kjellberg. He's co-founder and chairman of NORNORM. This is a circularity in furniture for offices, as those who did already the previous session with Jonas. Former CEO of Skype during the growth phase. That is the interesting growth phase, what you get through. And chairman and founder of so many companies that I am hard to name them all, but I think also distinguishes chairman and founder of companies acquired by Bertelsmann, Yahoo, and Apple, chairman of iCloud. And the last years of the Swedish version of OpenAI, chairman of that one, so also pretty deep into that. So I'm super curious to discuss with you the topics of AI, and I would like to start with you on the left side, Matthias. I learned from Financial Times that 20% of all revenues of BCG is done around AI. My question to you is, Are you turning into an IT company? Are you strategic hunting? Because what I learned, the IT budget is 10 times higher than the strategic budget. Or do firms really see AI as a strategic opportunity?
Well, I think it's a bit all of the above, right?
It's all of that. That is the honest answer.
But maybe to start with, first of all, I was at INSEAD, that's right. But when I came here, I have, Oliver, to give compliments back to the business school here. I think it's really a great place. So I was at the wrong business school maybe, but I think it's a big compliment back, right? Now,
we record that for the advertisement.
Now, secondly, I was listening closely. I mean, everyone had our Gen AI moment, didn't we? Right? I think you described yours, right? I had mine. I was remembering. I had mine in Davos in January 2023, and everyone was talking about two things. People were talking about the U.S. midterm elections, which happened in November 2022, and people were talking about ChatGPT. So that's the two things. No one remembers what people have been saying about the midterm elections, but everyone does what they have been talking about in terms of Gen AI. So this is really something everyone had his or her moment, and I think it made a huge difference on all our lives. And I think the hands here, I think, made a difference. Now, you asked what difference did it make to us, right, as BCG, and to our clients and to, I guess, industry overall. So we see this as being huge. It's a bit like, I compare it a bit to the internet, I would say, which, I don't know, 99, 2000, it was a big thing. It was a lot of hype, right? And if we remember, there was a hype with a lot of ups, some downs. But look at today, I think the way sort of these companies, the way the entire thing has shaped what we do, this will be the same. That's exactly what we believe, right? And so there is hype, but there is also lasting change. Now, what do we see? First of all, we see there is obviously a lot of technology out there, and this will create opportunities for companies. We typically talk about, in terms of opportunity, we talk about this will help companies to take out the 4 ugliest hours of the work week for their employees. Yeah? So this will help sort of take out hours where the average employee spends on text, on maybe boring tasks, also some of the creative tasks people do, and then they can redeploy that to focused work, to other areas in more productive areas, right? So it is a solution in a way to the talent challenge many companies and many countries face, but it's also, I think, a solution to employee happiness, to workplace attractiveness, and obviously also to productivity. Now, lastly, and then I'll stop, you also said, what does this do to BCG? No, obviously we also apply this ourselves, right? So we have rolled out OpenAI, ChatGPT to all our employee base.
So everybody's working with Copilot, for example.
Everybody's working with Copilot. We do have proprietary tools as well, which use large language models, which are available. But then we have on the tech stack above tools that help codify content on charts. We have one tool, it's called Dexter. Then we have a second one, which is called Navi, which is the Gen AI version of our knowledge management. So we do apply it to ourselves as well, and it will have very interesting and exciting consequences. Yeah.
Mm. Thank you. I'm just continuing to the journey. So the AI is not just of advantages. So we have a lot of also challenges. For example, I just recently learned that of a US analysis that ChatGPT actually is very much biased towards the Democrats in the US in terms of the political answers you give. And in UK, by the way, towards the Labour Party. So there are actually biases. And if you think out of it, deep learning, the deep neural networks actually are end-to-end learning. So everything what's in between is a black box. And the system is actually learning about the feature as well as the classification function. So there's nobody designing it, but it's actually learning. And we're having actually garbage in, garbage out. So it's learning from the past and going into the future. What are the challenges what we have to face, Alexandra, and how should we actively as a society address those?
Thank you for this question, and thanks for having me. I feel very privileged sitting here on the stage, and I think it's also a sign, because when we say AI, we need to say bias. that's a combined concept. And the starting of this session, it was said that AI is neutral, neither good nor bad, and I would disagree with that. AI is skewed towards historical data. And what we need to make very prominent when we speak about AI is that many people are not part of the data, they're not part of the system, the AI regulation, the programming, and not the testing. So the examples you just brought are a few of so many that we see when we test AI systems with diverse groups. And me, as a female, I see that very often in terms of recruiting processes, for instance. In this case, we see that due to females who work more part-time, who have care responsibilities, they do get less jobs opportunities when we place AI systems without ethical dimensions or regulations.
Yeah, so it's a problem, I think, which has been known. I think most prominent, it was also realized at Amazon, I think, 3 years ago.
Exactly, yeah.
When they saw the big biases. Now the problem is actually even more complex. Your company and you are also focusing on the problem of intersectionalism. Could you elaborate a little bit on that? So statistically, if I belong to one minority group, not female, it's the majority, but
exactly, yes.
Yes, but maybe as a disadvantaged one, then I'm maybe handicapped, and I'm a person of color. In the US, I'm in the intersection of several kind of in the intersection of actually several people where I have actually felt disadvantaged, or the algorithms are not favoring me.
Yes.
How do we handle that specific problem?
When we began our journey with FemAI, we had the hypothesis that feminism as an intersectional research method could solve the bias problem. And we're still researching on that because the technology is evolving so quickly. But what we see is that AI is currently a mirror of our society. And we need to speak always very sector and application specific. So when we look into facial recognition software, I published a paper about the usage of facial recognition software in the US versus in EU. And it is very interesting and also shocking when you look into the results in US and when you check the results on gender and skin color. So in this example, we see intersectional discrimination because of the skin color, and gender means 34% of women of color are misidentified. Just 21, still a high number, male people of color, men of color, and then this percentage decreases. Still females, white females are discriminated, and the white male as a stereotype is the less discriminatory group, which we see in most AI systems. But this can't be applied to all systems as we have different structures in our society. So in crediting where you come from is a very important aspect, whereas, as I said, in recruiting, the gender bias is very high. So we need to engage as a society sector-specific, where we need to include views that are currently unseen, speaking about people from the global south, people with disability. The list is very, very long.
If I go on to introduce the last one, Jonas, how is that in business? So we see the societal problems and the biases. I think it is, especially if you talk about recruiting processes, it's absolutely clear we have to address those because otherwise the results are suboptimal. But you also invested in Zalando, you have been at BCG Digital Ventures, you have been on the Swedish version of the OpenAI. How the whole concept of AI from a business perspective is obviously increasing revenues and increasing efficiency. In terms of revenues, it's actually the dream of every economist to reduce the consumer rent to a minimum, to identify the perfect price every individual is ready to pay ready to pay. So the willingness to pay to exactly address everything. How do you address this dilemma, and how do you work around that also in your practical career as an absolute serial entrepreneur?
Well, it's a long question. I think it'd take an hour to answer. But I think, first of all, I've always come in it from a profitable, how do you drive more companies profitable? How do you make more money? So I think that's where it actually started in, when Kinnevik invested into Zalando, basically understanding that they were really, really good at driving what was segment of one and really showcasing the right products at the right time and getting as much money out of that product. So basically there, the whole algorithms perspective of actually basically driving out the assortment, making more money, and actually doing that in a very, very efficient way, actually leapfrog the company to actually have the possibility of actually taking a position and not just being a static web page, but really building it dynamic and really focusing it on every individual. I think that's where it started, and I saw the power of this and what computer science together with people knowing the merchandise, how we could work together hand in hand. And I think that drove me later into BCG Digital Ventures, and I started working with Sylvain, one of the earlier guys in Gamma there, basically just driving profit for companies, basically going to the boards and just saying, okay, can I drive profit for you, and I can do cost out. And then basically optimizing that as much as possible. And I think we can come back to it later, but it's a very interesting perspective then if you drive these models, and if you just take the hypothesis of like, you're working with a big clothing retailer, 10,000 stores. How do you optimize assortment, for example, which is an interesting thing that hundreds of people are doing, but you very fast come to that the AI and the computer can actually do this super, super fast and super interesting. And then you start looking at that, and you take the perspective that the team says, in France we have a bit smaller sizes, in Germany a bit bigger, in the US, this is fine, everyone's fine with that. And then you run that, and then basically you start looking into it and say, okay, but why is one of the stores here in France actually having much bigger sizes, but it's just 500 meters away? It's a total different assortment, and it's driving the computers defining allocations of bigger sizes here. This is super strange. There must be something wrong. You go in and look at it, and then basically, it's on the Champs-Élysées. It makes sense because all the Americans are flying there and shopping there. So the purchasing pattern for that store is totally different. And you're like, God damn it, we're onto something. So then you start looking basically, okay, how does this apply in different stores? Where can we find different outliers? And then just from a hypothetical perspective, they say, okay, that's interesting. Okay, where can we find other stores with the most biggest sizes? Okay, so we look at that. And then you see, okay, what happens there? Yeah, there are the computers recommending that we actually don't do any markdowns because it actually shows that we can actually push out older assortment to full price. That's super interesting. And then you start, okay, where is that store? That's in a fully African-American population. Now it becomes a bit more difficult from a sustainability perspective, because now it's like mathematics with philosophy. The natural thing, if you're just looking at my computer science brain and my engineering perspective, let's download all the data we can find on that to optimize the model. My philosophy part, I'm not very good at that, says like, maybe we're getting out of the end of the boundary here. And I think this is the dilemma that also drove me into sustainability, and that drove me into starting NORNORM, where we're also using AI to actually optimize as much as possible to drive profit. But I think this was where I really started like, whoa, and who decides this? Because for me, it's super interesting because it's basically millions and millions of decisions made on a real-time basis that you really can't control. It's more about the input. But the input for me was always more profit, more cost out, more revenue.
Let me check on that before we go back to the ethical challenge. If you get more profitability, you actually need to understand the business model.
Yeah.
Business model story, how to create value, capture value. And most important, from my experience from research, is actually that you understand the domain knowledge pretty good. So it's not enough if you just jump in and say it's all about correlation and let the model run and work. So what is your experience with what we also call the dual PhD problem? You need to have a deep knowledge on the domain, and you have to have a deep knowledge actually on the AI, on the technology, on the engineering background.
Well, I think I started computer science school, and then I understood that most of the decisions were made by the business administration guys, so I doubled up my degree to save it. And then when we started Skype, Niklas said to me, Jonas, since you can't code, you can do the useless stuff like PR, marketing, and sales. So I ended up on the business side. Because I was not good enough to even touch the computer. I still think I am, but even think,
Don't believe you after our pre-discussion.
So I think for me it is, you need to know what you're driving and what you're looking for, and you need to drive those hypotheses to actually be able to do cost out. Because otherwise you need to look at the biggest problems, because if you're doing cost out on things that doesn't matter, it's not going to have an impact on your organization or your company as a whole. So I think, of course, you need to know the business quite well, and then come, of course, working in the retail world in my perspective, then that could help, see, okay, what did I understand and how could we leverage that into other things? And even if you're just selling a cup of coffee on the corner, how do you leverage that, But it's super interesting, even if you have the business knowledge, because I think the intersection is also that you would say, okay, the most loyal customers by tradition have been given the biggest discounts, but the computer will very fast tell you should not give them discounts. So then you need to find the illusions of giving them stars or balloons or many things else.
So that's the Zalando experience. I clearly see that. That's still stuck with you. A new MIT research done by MIT, just this year published, showed actually that the AI use cases in development, especially if you talk about efficiency problems, internal, are actually restricted by inadequate data quality, 57%, weak data integration, 54%, and weak governance of the data, 47%. 1 out of 5 manufacturers in that sample, which has been looked at, I think it has been 300, said actually that their data set, only 1 out of 5 said their data set was actually ready. So lousy data quality means actually, again, garbage in, garbage out. How do we handle that one? Maybe Matthias or Jonas. What would you recommend your clients?
Should I give it a start, Jonas? Or?
Give it a start now.
Well, what you say resonates, right? I mean, when we talk to clients and clients look at this and say, oh my God, there must be so much money in this, Jonas, to your point, right? On markdown pricing, on other things. And it's true, there is a lot of money in it if you do it. But we would always say the rule we apply is 10, 20, 70. And what do I mean with that? So success here is 10% the underlying technology. So this is the LLM you use, the software you use. It's 20% data, the customization of that underlying technology, and it's actually 70% people and organizational processes and decision making above that. So to your point,
that's the legitimation for BCG.
And that's exactly the pitch.
I got that message.
You got that message. No, but I think the point being the 20%. So the data points you mentioned, which are huge, right? They're the 20% in between, right? So they're double important than the technology. It's true. But even more important, what we would say is that you are actually adjusting the organization behind it, that you're upskilling your people, that you're changing the decision-making process. I mean, to use the example you gave, right? I mean, on markdown pricing, I mean, yes, it's absolutely nice if you know, right? It doesn't help you at all if you do not adjust the decision-making process behind it, right? If the store manager still can overrule and decide, you know what? You will not make any money with it. Right? So yes, the data I think is an issue, but I think it's even sort of more pronounced on the 70. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think it's 2 points. I think change management, I think it's the people that don't really understand, then it's the data layer. I would think most people, when I hear it, like we don't have enough data, is the biggest bullshit I've ever heard. Because basically with very little data, if you know what you're looking for, it's the best way to start and decouple that data and solve that specific problem. But people just want to have a big data lake or whatever like Accenture has sold in, and then you can't find anything. So if you know what problem you want to solve, then you can do it with very little data, because when I look at it, often if I just get to one number, if it's 70%, 60%, then you can already start the change management discussions, because you don't need to have 79.68 to actually make that decision, because the change process, even in my own organization, is super complicated. You know, everybody needs to be in the same role and hold hands and so on to get decisions. Maybe that's a Swedish thing, but you know.
So you would say just have more courage and just go for it. Even if the data accuracy and quality might be a challenge. I mean, if you talk about manufacturing processes, I would not agree with you, because manufacturing processes, to optimize that needs more also internal knowledge. And if you have the wrong knowledge, you're coming to the wrong conclusion, because it's all about correlation and not causality AI.
Of
Would
course,
you
but
agree
it's more, I think the point I'm trying to make is that often people come with the perspective we don't have enough data, but if you know exactly how that machine works,
Yes.
exactly how that is deployed, what material is going through, with quite limited set of data numbers, you can probably optimize only that machine.
Yes.
And then you need, and that, if that's the biggest driver of your value chain, then start at that machine.
Yeah.
So that's just my perspective, because I hear it so often. We don't have enough data, we can't do anything.
Yes.
Of
So
course
there's
you can.
enough there, and especially we need to
Yeah.
address the 80% of the data which are unstructured, and it's maybe just not in the comfortable format we are used to be. And
The data is there, you just haven't extracted it. It's in the machine, it's in the delivery processes. There's so many places where you can look, where you can add data to your problem. So that's what I want to.
If I may, Oliver, yes, the data is there. And I agree, right, on that. And it's still a sort of a bit of a challenge. Just one thing to add, I mean, the data very often in companies is hosted in the ERP system. So most companies use SAP, right? And so a big hurdle, and you do need to have access to that data. You need to have access relatively fast to that data. And I think getting that house, so to speak, in order is quite important. It's quite cumbersome. It's actually a big challenge for leaders. Just to give you an idea, I mean, SAP, as many here will know, right, at the moment is rolling out SAP for HANA. So SAP has 70,000 customers. They have set a deadline up until 2027, until everyone needs to be moved to SAP for HANA. SAP for HANA is much better to use AI and Gen AI because it's a much faster, so the data is available much, much faster than it was in older ones. In fact, with the older releases, it's super hard to leverage that data real time. So it's actually a precondition to do so. But you know what? Out of the 70,000 clients of SAP, 50,000 have not migrated yet, right? So only 20,000 have, right? So there is a huge, and the reason why they don't is that these migrations, they're super costly. Right? They're super costly. For a large company, this is it's $1 billion that such a migration costs, right? So there is huge investments needed, huge, I would say, commitment needed, huge leadership also needed. So it is, yes, the data is there, but I think to get a large company ready is a big deal.
Jonas, would you agree it's always huge investment? I saw you looked a little bit skeptical.
No, but I think I would actually flip coin it around. I think there's a huge opportunity. I would actually argue that if you're not working on cost out and using AI, you're going to be irrelevant as a large company. And I think that's the challenge. Either you sign up for a big check with BCG and get it done.
It's a good idea.
Or maybe or maybe you die. But I think it's the challenge, of course, is, and then we can talk how you should price it later, but that's a different perspective. If he does it an uplift, then I'll go for it. But I think the challenge, go back to your IT, the head of CTOs, CFOs, and ask, are we on, I would like to take in BCG to run, a full analyze and redo all our, AI perspective. What would they say? Most would just say, no, we have it covered. We're fine. And I would say if there is any CTO today that says, I'm fine, we don't need the help, I'd fire him on the spot. Because, the race is so good and just attracting top talent. So I think we're in a shifting point on society when it comes to sustainability, but also on operational efficiency. And I think, I don't know how far they've come now. I've left 3 years ago, but it's more about, I think things are happening so fast, and if you do not adapt to this, you will not be competitive. Either on upselling and selling the right product at the right price, or cost out. And I think you can just take up the Uber app and compare it to your neighbor. They're already at the segment of one pricing. They're optimizing it to maximize revenue.
Alexandra, you looked critical.
Yes, I want to disagree with the both of you.
That's probably the right thing.
Yes, of course. I mean, we're having a debate here, right?
Absolutely good.
So I agree. We have a lot of data, but if systems work for 49% of the society, how can they be good systems? With whom do you test your accuracy rate? Who's the testing? Who's the user group?
And I think it goes back to the dilemma I started with. how do we take, mathematics and philosophy into that, and how do we actually put it through different lenses? And I know, like, how can we utilize your own software and say, okay, when we're deploying things, can we run it through your software? Can we run it through other softwares and see different biases? Because I would never be the person to feel that I should define, okay, how far is too far, and how do we do that? So I think, we need entrepreneurs like yourself to try to define those frameworks, because it is math and philosophy. And then we need to do that through society's lenses. So I think, but when I was at the forefront and you're running at that, there is no software. That's starting to happen now, and we're inventing as we go along. So I think the more we can define that, I think we're in a much better position, because then we can define guidelines where we can say, okay, where is too far and where is not too far. I think, individual pricing we have just accepted in airlines and taxis and so on. The alternative is going back to a taxameter and not knowing where the cab is going to show up. So
let's switch to
if I may just, I think, Alexandra, you're bringing up a good point, right? Yeah. Who do you optimize these models for, and so on, right?
And this is about efficiency, to make it
Really
clear.
fair.
It's not just, so yes, bias ethics, but I want to have a very high performance model for my customers, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, you do, right? And I think it's a really, really fair point. And look, if you just leave it up to business, you know what business will do? They will optimize for the majority.
Tell me.
That's what they will do, right? Because I think you're essentially optimizing profit, right? You will optimize for the typical shopper in the clothing retailer you described, right? To the average, right? And they will leave out minority groups. It's sort of 80-20, right? You're focusing on the 80, you're leaving aside the 20, right? So I do think there is, yes, we do by now have D&I programs, I would say, in the physical world. I do think the call for action indeed is, I think, for D&I programs on the, I would say, AI world. And I guess regulators will play a part of that. But I do think, similarly, I think to the DI space in the physical world, also business needs to play its part. I think you do have a fair point.
Because when we add up the numbers, it's actually the majority of the population that is not considered. It's not the minority.
Mm-hmm. Let's maybe just focus on a, for society, pretty relevant topic. You mentioned Gen AI, generative AI already, large language models. The investment in Gen AI skyrockets. $25 billion has been invested. Companies like OpenAI, Anthropic, Hugging Face. I'm wondering, where's the productivity inflection? Are there? If we have the Llama model, Llama 3 right now, which has been opened up, which is, I think, was a surprise, but a logical answer towards, if you think of the competition of OpenAI dominating right now the discussion, Gemini from Google catching up, and then Meta, the chatbot Meta AI, which is based on 70 billion parameters, has been published on an open source agreement. So I found it was interesting. Maybe it's the only logical answer what Meta could have done if you have two dominant ones, because there might be not enough data, not enough usage to actually have more than maybe two systems, LLMs. I would like right now a few critical questions. We're running out of data. That's an amazing answer I learned from computer scientists. We're running out of data for LLMs if we increase the 70 billion parameters, because the models are so large that we have the overfitting problem. Secondly, we have a huge energy consumption. So I'll ask you, what should we do? Smaller models, Alexandra?
Yes.
Different monopolizing in terms of the language models, maybe smaller models? What would be your opinion?
Yeah, because I just found this sentence so memorizable. How much water drinks an LLM? I think that's a very interesting question to ask. And also in terms of performance, and we heard that it's always a use case specific problem we're trying to solve. And also from a European view, going into targeted AI solutions might be recreating the frame value, because we will have we will be able to have more accurate output for also very specific problems and user groups. So we can optimize models for user groups that are currently maybe left out. So we also have a better performance for these target groups, but also smaller models consume less energy. And according to the EU Parliament, 1.5 to 4% of carbon dioxide emissions can, that's important, can be saved by 2030. However, also most recent publications suggest that when we continue the AI journey, in 2027, AI will consume as much energy as whole Argentina. So we see on the one hand, policymakers, and in the EU AI Act, environmental sustainability is a can, not a must. So the ball has passed through the court of the private sector now. The question is, for me, how do we save the carbon dioxide footprint, the 4%, let's say, that is researched by the EU Parliament, instead of creating all this energy and efficiency input while creating larger models and also playing around with models. I think we had our AI play around time now. We should make something very useful out of that.
Yes, you mentioned, I think you mentioned a very important part because we have different models. Every model uses a lot of energy. In the US, for example, there is every 5th new built transformator for electricity is actually due to data centers. So it becomes very relevant, and the sustainable AI, what we also did in research, also with PhD students, we looked a bit in the sustainable AI perspective, is actually a bit a challenging thing if the LLMs always further increase. But on the other side, it's also quite difficult because the whole basic model is actually dependent right now on tech companies. Academia is not relevant at all. So I don't have the figures right now prepared, but academia is having less than 15% of all contribution towards the basic foundational models. It's all tech, because what you need in deep neural networks, it's a flexible architecture. Yes, academia could help in that, but it's data, we don't have that, and it's GPUs, which is just amazing large sum of money. And we don't have that. So it's actually kind of monopolizing. Is there kind of a danger for society if we have a monopolizing Google, like Elon Musk, you know, thinking threat of humanity, getting more intelligent, overwhelming us? Or is it a help because we just have one and save energy instead of having 5 competing models? From a liberal perspective, I would prefer to have the choice. From energy consumption, maybe it makes sense to monopolize. What is your perspective on that, Matthias?
Well, for what it's worth, I don't think smaller models is the answer, right? Or I don't think it should be the answer personally, right? I mean, maybe some people have different views on that. I certainly think it will not be the answer, right? We may want it to be the answer. It's not going to be the answer, because that's sort of where progress is going to go. And
it might be the answer on our smartphone. If Apple starts with something on our device, it will be a smaller one. But yes.
Fair, right?
I agree.
Fair, but I think that's the way progress goes, right? So I think we better deal with it. And I feel, so then you're asking the question, well, where is this going to go, right? Where is the industry structure going to go on the LLMs? And as you rightly pointed out, there is huge economies of scale in building these, and they consume a lot of energy. So I think, by the way, on the energy consumption, I do think the answer at the end of the day has to be renewable energy. It has to be, right? And obviously energy efficiency. And on the economies of scale and the concentration, I do think you're right. I think on the basics, I think competition authorities will play a key role to make sure that there is enough competition still left, right? Because obviously the sheer economics will drive this to almost natural monopolies, right? That's what the economists would say. That's one driver. I think the other thing that's gone, and they're by the way, all at the moment in mostly one country, right? They're all in the US and to some degree in China. which is a separate problem and raises another dimension, which is the geopolitical one. So I do think we are going to see LLMs emerging sort of sometimes around the geopolitical context in other geopolitical environments, in the Middle East, obviously in China, also in Europe around defense applications and so on, because you will not, sovereigns will not rely on LLMs from the US on those type of situations. So I think there is the LLM landscape you're going to see. I think it's influenced, yes, by economies of scale and so on, but it's also geopolitical, I would say, considerations that's going to play a role, and many other factors.
Let me emphasize and build on that geopolitical perspective. So the US has in the last year brought out 61 notable AI models, the EU 21, China 15. So kind of a balance, but naturally the US have a lot of big companies in that. If we look to patents, it's quite different. Patents, we have 62,000 patents in 2022. China got 61%. There's also the Chinese Patent Office, which is a bit kind of subsidizing it a bit, but still 61%. 21% is the US and 2% has the European Union. So for me, and 16% rest of the world. So it's kind of coming into a concentration. How will that evolve geopolitically? There was already previously, before the generative AI, the discussion, will we have two internets, two worlds, the Hawaii world, the Cisco world, and Europe has to be torn in between, but most probably will follow the North American one. Can you elaborate on that? Who has an opinion on that? Because it's getting a lot in big things, but companies have to make decisions on which systems we rely on.
Look, I guess we all have opinions on that. I think you said we may have two internets. You said Europe may follow the US. I would say we have two internets, and Europe has followed the US, right, on that. I think that's a fact. And if you look at also the conflict between the US and China, I guess what you also in your data see is that this conflict, yes, it's a military conflict, but it's hard. It's a and everyone has figured out that it's playing out on the technology side, right? And that's why you do have those two internets today. And I do think, speaking as a European, right, I do think it is in fact to some degree a level of sovereignty that you have, I would say, technological independence. So I do think it's a question of independence to have at least a minimum of, I would say, also on the sort of bottom tech stack, a minimum level of technology there.
Jonas, you have been on the foundational models also, but what is the role of Europe? So I would say AI is something which is happening in the US if we think in the B2C business, and a lot in China, coming out in kind of in all areas. Europe hasn't found its ways. Europe hasn't been the very first with the AI Regulation Act. That can be an advantage. I will be not too critical. Maybe Alexandra later on a question to you. But first, actually, what are the use cases and the sources of competitiveness of European companies from a serial entrepreneur perspective as yourself?
Well, I think it's super interesting. I joined in Gen AI and invested in that, Swedish, very prominent company very early on into the model, spun out of the military, spun out into, research academia. And the interesting perspective here, funding that company, walking around to the European VCs, nobody knew chat. Who gives a shit about that? That is not really working. Everyone tried chat. It's not good. So very few VCs would invest. And the ones that were actually interested in doing it were always comparing us with OpenAI and say, why would you survive? Because these guys just raised this amount of money right now. So I would say, we need to go back to the perspective of actually running companies at a deficit at a very, very long time, with a horizon and a vision of getting to some end state. And I think the Americans are really, really good at that and see the value creation now in OpenAI again. But then companies like Gavagai, are forced to profitability, the shareholders, the board members, everyone's like, but when are you going to make money? We have to make money. It's a good company, it makes money. And that kind of thinking drives, that VC, swinging for the fences, really going big, we lose out on that in Europe.
Yes.
And then in this perspective, I would say it's a winner-takes-all market. I think the train has already left the station here. So, we can probably, governmental-wise say, we have to have some AI for our infrastructure and for our defense system. But, catching those guys right now where they are, but also I think everyone's talking about the answers that you get. I would say the biggest challenge from the computer science perspective is understanding the bad questions that is put into chat and redefining that and understanding millions and millions of parameters to actually give the right answers. Like, I want to write a book about a green frog. Okay, what is a book? How long is it? How is the storytelling? Blah, blah, blah. What's a green frog? Blah, blah. So it's an enormous amount of perspective just to give the answer. And I think for me, that was the really challenging thing that we didn't crack in Europe.
But maybe then your answer, if I interpret your answer, is actually, well, the train on the foundational models, that's gone.
I'm often wrong, so
Maybe we shouldn't restart on it, but let's build. It's like the internet. The internet has been developed. Yes, there was a big boom. Most of the companies died afterwards, but today we have the Googles and the Amazons, and they made value out of the internet. So if I would ask you right now,
I was part of Bertelsmann and Lycos, and that really went down the drain as well because a couple of students started in the basement of Stanford.
Yes.
Had all the money, Telefonica, Bertelsmann, what could possibly go wrong?
Yes, but would you? But then you would say we need actually to build on use cases above that. So let's build kind of the Salesforce. Let's build of, from my perspective, I would say the industrial metaverse with the Siemens, Bosch, and the kind of industrial players where we are really strong in our region, in Europe. And this is actually something where I think we have the comparative advantage in terms of a regional perspective.
Yeah, but I think we can build the apps, like we're building apps on Apple's App Store. Yeah. And they will, channel 30% of the profits. And we in Europe can build all the small apps for all the different cantons and be charged, the 30% tax. So I'm just wondering when AI is going to start taxing all the apps as well.
Yes, will be. Before I open up the audience, maybe one last sentence on the leadership. That was the student introduction, as mentioning actually, kind of what will be substituted. And I think we all need to agree it's not full jobs. Very few jobs will totally substitute it. But maybe tasks, as you said, hopefully the most uncomfortable task. I would have a long list on that. My university administration would know what these guys are, these tasks are. And I would like them to automate. But what kind of new leadership would we need? Maybe having a short sentence, short answer from everybody of you. Maybe Alexandra, you as a representative of the new leadership, young leader, what would you expect if we are living in a world 10 years ahead and a lot of more automated stuff will happen? Not eliminated humanity, as Elon Musk said, but just automated maybe for the good, if we take the optimistic perspective.
I think leadership should use AI to ask and find out what makes people happy. In none of the discussions in AI so far, I see the dimension of happiness. We see the negative impact of social media, for instance, very much.
You're not at all on social media?
Oh, yes, I am. I feel the negative impact, but still, I'm using it. And I mean, we could ask the question, who thinks the negatives outweigh the positives? Most people will raise their hand and still say, I'm still on social media, but this is exactly
addiction.
This is part of the problem, and where leadership must play a guiding role. How do we ensure technology makes employees happy, so it takes away the tasks that maybe disturb them from being creative, making meaningful connections with their colleagues?
Thank you. Jonas?
I think it's more about rethinking, the hierarchy of how we do society. Why is it, everybody should have an Alexandra in their board. Everyone should be in the executive board. I'm just wondering,
education.
And I would when would, BCG, promote you to senior partner directly. That's the interesting perspective, because it's based on our bias that we are always defined by the hierarchy. So get a lot of smart women into leading positions, and early on, that comes with a different perspective. Start from the top, and that will actually influx the perspective. But it's very easy to sit here and say that, because you need to change the whole promotion perspective. But I'm still amazed how little brilliant female we actually have in boards, in executive committees, senior partners, whatever it is. We're like,
and younger generation,
and get that new generation with that new thinking, really inclined into your old legacy thinking perspective.
And I'm learning so much from the experience, though. Yes.
Matthias.
Well, first of all, I take notes.
I'll follow up.
But I do think Jonas he has a point.
I see there's a kind of interesting small circle here, so we can discuss a bit more openly. Yes.
Yes. But I do think on a more serious note, I think Jonas does have a point, right? Now, separately from that, I think you asked the question, sort of, what does this all mean for leadership? I mean, when I talk to CEOs, I mean, it's very interesting when you talk to CEOs and you ask them sort of, well, what's your life like, right? And how is this job different than others? You know what CEOs typically say? They say, first of all, you're not getting prepared for that job at all, right? And secondly, they say, it's very interesting. I never understood that the job of the CEO is, it's the most difficult thing is the multitude of stakeholders you deal with. So you manage your board, right? Now the board may not agree with that, but you probably need to do so, right? Certainly in a whatever German-Swiss context. Secondly, you manage your management board, right? Your executive team, you manage the employees, right? You manage sort of 1,000 stakeholder groups. And what happened in the last, if you think about that lens, the last years were super challenging, and AI is super challenging too, because a lot of new stakeholder groups have been added. So first, the pandemic added talent to that. Yeah. So now as a CEO, you're not just managing your board, not your executive team, not the senior leaders, you're actually managing for talent, because talent all of a sudden is short after the pandemic, right? Then Ukraine was invaded, and we had October 7th last year. So now you're also managing geopolitics, you're dealing with politics, right? So the second big group, talent and politics, have been added. And I think AI adds a third group to that, which is tech, right? So all of a sudden, I mean, these things don't happen in your company if you don't deeply understand them, if you're not engaging with the community, right? If you're not engaging with the Alexandras, with the Jonases of this world, hey, you're not going to advance, right? So it adds a whole new lens to an already gigantic stakeholder agenda, and a very important one, right? So that's, I think, what, if you're asking the question, what does this do to leadership? I think on the CEO level, I think that's how it feels.
Thank you very much. Thanks very much for the discussion. I would like just to open up to the audience. What are questions? I see right now the lady, yes? Please introduce shortly and name.
Hi, my name's Katie McIntyre. I'm a previous member of the Apple design team. I have my own company now, which deals a lot with female empowerment specifically. I wanted to ask a question to you, Jonas. You made some really awesome points about including more female leadership in companies in order to overcome bias. But do you personally think that women should be responsible with having to deal with the issues of bias? And what can you personally do as a man to overcome issues of bias within your company?
Ooh. It's treading on a minefield, even for me, without the PR department. I'm lucky it wasn't addressed. Well, I think it starts with actually, really having the perspective of getting 50-50, and also defining, the company's foundation of getting young talent, for me, really important in all positions very early on. And driving that culture where it's more about no rules, and it's basically where a good idea can come from anywhere. And it's not only for young females, it's basically for everyone. How do you include that? Because I think for me, it's really maximizing everybody's ability to contribute in a perspective. And I think that is the challenge and the difficulty of basically, for me, breaking a very old system where it goes back to the Roman Empire, like there's a boss over a group of 8 people, and that just follows up. So how do we rethink that perspective to get that perspective? Then I think it's super difficult to just be super honest, because if you're working with AI and you go down to the tech university and you employ, the pool of people is predominantly nearly 90% men that do computer science today. So really there is a scarcity. And then it's even more difficult. You recruit brilliant females, and then you have someone that is diverse and say, yeah, but she doesn't understand this field. Yeah, but like it's super difficult to put that together. But I think that's, so it starts with a triangle. It, to some extent, starts with education. And I think for me, it also starts with how do you operate and run companies? And that's where I would really think we need to rethink and have much more of a design thinking approach into the whole perspective of running organization. And that's also why some US companies are just faster in adapting and being more to it, but we're here in a very hierarchic way of defining what is a good or bad idea. So I think those would be my perspective. Secure that the pool of talented is 50-50, and then redefine so we can actually get the promotion up. And then I think then there are difficult questions, which I think for me is like, okay, if you leave for leave of absence and have 3 kids, do you get to keep that tenure in all the consulting companies? Or do you come back where you stopped? So it's a society perspective where we have not been able to promote the leave of absence and doing other things because we're so focused on the task you're solution solving. So yeah, that was basically a no answer.
Thanks very much. What was the elaborated
for
one?
10 minutes.
Next question. Yes, please, in front.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Amanda. I run a nonprofit in Brazil working with gender-based violence, especially on internet. I would like first to thank Alexandra. It was amazing to hear you, and it's amazing to see other female leaders in the stages like that. I would like to hear from you. We have a lot of decision makers here today, especially male and very privileged decision makers. What do you say to them that from today they can't forget? What is something that they need to take in account in every decision making they take, having in consideration gender, race, and other types of intersectionalities?
No pressure. Alexandra.
Sometimes I don't feel that these people are aware of the power they have. And we speak a lot about performance and optimizing, but I would love to change for one day the perspective so they feel what unsecure environments look like or how it feels to be discriminated. Yeah.
Experiment. Yes. Yes, please.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm Asen. I'm from Bulgaria, but currently working in London. I want to ask a bit of a more technical question. So you mentioned the data constraint, but imagine that we have enough data to keep training these models. You mentioned that there's going to be a problem with energy, about the consumptions that these LLMs are going to have, probably the environmental impact, but also there's going to be the strain that that's going to leave on the grid. So I want to ask you, as we are improving these models on our strive to AGI, do you think that we'll be able to overcome this pressure on the grid? Do you have some solutions? Because it's easy to mention the problems, it's more difficult to come up with the solutions. Do you have some solutions to the grid problem? Or do you think that this will constrain us from developing AGI or improving models more? It's an open question to anybody who has an answer. Thank you.
Yes, Jonas, I think you should be the one to answer that one.
Well, I'm a tech optimist, and I think this just goes back to all the perspective when the internet started. It's like we're never going to be able to have video on the internet because the capacity is not there.
Yes.
But if the driving force of revenue and profit is behind this, they will probably sort out the grid over time, is my more like optimistic tech perspective. Because if there's money, someone will define it. If we would go back, to 1999, 98, when we were playing around with the first internet perspective here in Europe, and we'd explain to them how we're going to watch movies over our cell phones 6-7 hours a day, they would just say we were just utterly insane. It was never going to be possible because the whole network was going to be constrained, and there was like a 322 megabit cable between US and Atlantic, and it would be filled up, and it would be impossible to do all of these things. So that's just my thinking. If there's progress and there's money behind it, entrepreneurs will follow.
And you need to add the economic answer is there has been investments, and they all increased actually the bandwidth because of the new economy bubble. After that, a lot of companies went bankrupt, and the bandwidth became cheap, and that's why a lot of companies, internet-based companies, actually rise. So that is also the second part. It's not technological, it's also economically, and maybe we will see that also.
That's true, and I think, I'm also a tech optimist. I think it's gonna happen. But I think what will happen, a little bit similar also with the internet, is we will see, so AGI will over time come, right? But it will come in some places earlier, so geographic places earlier, faster, and socioeconomic places earlier, faster, larger, with more impact than in others, right? And I think the great problem is one, right? I mean, it will be restrained sort of in certain areas, right? And others will have, as today, slower internet and not be able to watch sort of 4K video on demand, and others, right? So I think it's coming, but it will be the averaged, and I think for us as society, I think it leaves us with a question of how do we deal with, to some extent, the inequality which will come from that.
AGI, artificial general intelligence, the thing what Elon Musk think it's already there, therefore suit OpenAI to open up the model. Yes, there's here the question. Yes, the lady in front.
Hello, thank you very much. I had some questions on data. I think there's a lot of conversation about data. And I was wondering, how do you ensure in such an environment when you have to be, I think I didn't present myself, but I can do it at the end. How do you ensure that the data you collect respects individual privacy? And how do you address ethical dimensions of using personal data for your own profit, especially under the pressure of speed and competitivity? And I'm Diane. I'm studying at Oxford University. So thank you so much.
So part of GDPR, what would you answer? Maybe Alexandra.
And also to the question beforehand, I think the legal framework should be always the starting point. So regulators give us the play field, and within that, we do define how we operate with data. So the problem of privacy should be the starting point. So we shouldn't optimize on efficiency while violating privacy rights. Yes.
Anything to add?
I think it's a really, really good question. I think you're right, Alexandra. The legal framework will be the start. I will say that with AI and Gen AI so the responsibility we will place on companies will be huge. And the reason being that regulation will be too slow. It's not going to be fast enough, and it's not being able to go deep enough. So acting responsible, the whole concept of responsible AI will be super, super important, and will span things such as D&I and other aspects, but also sort of rights of personal privacy and others. And I think sort of developing codes of conduct and so on, I do think it's a huge, huge topic which will come to us.
So that means actually we have to take the responsibility within our circle of influence for our company leaders, because regulation always lags behind a few years. And the speed of development is so huge, and that we have actually to take responsibility. Yeah.
And I think there will be consumer-facing AI brands for trust, because that's the gap.
Very well, yes. Very last question. Yes, please. On the right side. Gentlemen.
Hi, my name is Valentin. I study LLMs as a way to model a sequence. And sequence is not only language, there are other ways, other sequences that exist out there. So my question here is maybe towards Alexandra, but also other panelists, because we talk about bias, right? And having in mind that all the models are just statistical models, they optimize for general trends. So not statistical trends will not predict minority events. Therefore, there are some absolutely inadequate use cases that happen for AI. And I think there is a huge role between people who are working on that and executive people in order to communicate properly opportunities, risks, and everything connected with that. Do you see any opportunity for where this communicating pipeline might be improved? Thank you.
Alexandra.
So I agree that we have, on the one hand, we had a very technical debate and then an ethical debate, and they were speaking different languages. And I think we start now to develop a joint language to understand each other, which is very much needed. And for me, the main question would be if we can use AI to tackle these problems. So we already have bias mitigation tools on the one hand, for instance, or I just found a project where pipelines that are not built yet using imagery software were prompting where leaks could arise. So predictive maintenance systems already anticipated where the future leak would be to improve the building process. This doesn't sound feminist, but you could apply it to the sector. So yeah, I think we will never save, we always will have bias, but the question is how we define it and if we influence with positive biases. And of course, that's a company perspective or a company responsibility to say we want to do that. Yes. Mm. I don't have the full problem, the solution to the question, sorry.
I think a very last remark on where will we be in the next 5 years. I don't dare to ask 10 years. 5 years is a huge amount. What would you think, Jonas?
I think it's going to be super fun.
Super fun.
Yeah, super fun. Like, imagine of all the new things that are going to come out and all the things that every executive needs to dodge. You know, if it's, you know, image recognition tomorrow, what's the film sector going to be? You know, architects, will they exist? You know, double twins. It's going to be super imaginative what we can do with all these models that are going to start adapting to use cases. So there's going to be enormous amount of wealth being built, but there's also going to be a lot of companies that can't compete. Yep. So for me as an entrepreneur, it's, you know, hurrah.
Change is great. Ladies and gentlemen, the AI revolution is coming. I think also we have to take the remark of our president. Let's be optimistic to that and let's embrace it. Let's embrace the opportunity. And I think AI, as the intro already has been said, is not a good or bad. It depends on the purpose and on the context and how we design it. So we rather should think of how, because it anyway will come. For me, I always start, those who know me more often, I always start with the last recommendation for companies: think big, start small, fail cheap, and move fast. I think we need to move much faster because the ability of us in our survival, also competitive survival, means actually we need to learn faster than the environment is changing, and the environment is changing very much. Thank you very much to the distinguished panelists. Thank you very much to the audience.